Hello and welcome to the NCCB foyer, where we are hosting the Image of Christ exhibition, which was created by me, Nathan Vuuren. And today we are going to do a walkthrough for each of the paintings in the show for our podcast live room conversations. So when you enter the NCCB foyer, you are confronted firstly with a big room full of monochromatic paintings. Now, I intentionally did this with a single color because I wanted to create something that was emotive, that was affective, with an A. It had affect, it had emotion attached to it. And I always found monochromatic images carry a weight and a singularity, and without the distraction of color, we can focus on what it is I wanted to portray in this exhibition. And the color itself is vitally important. The color you see is this very dark, bluey, purpley, warm black color, and it's made up of four colors. The first color is lapis lazuli blue or French ultramarine, which traditionally was used to portray Christ's robes. So it was a very significant color that was associated traditionally, particularly with Jesus. The second color to create this color was a scarlet lake, which is a beautiful crimson red color, which traditionally was used to portray Christ's blood. And so traditionally, each saint or someone who believed in Jesus was always touched by this blood. There was an aspect of that color in each saint. And so you combine these two colors, you get that purpley, bluey hue that you see in the paintings. And I thought those two colors really do represent Jesus's divinity, like him as God. And I wanted, because he was God and man, I wanted colors that represented his connection to humanity, connection to being on earth. So I mixed in two earth-derived colors that were derived from clay or mud, and that is burnt umber and yellow ochre. And that really grounded this gray, bluey color that I used to create all of these paintings. So when you come in, have a look at everything. Don't focus on anything in particular. Get an idea for the entire exhibition, each painting. And you can start absolutely anywhere, but I would encourage you, as you come in, start at the far left of the show. One of my main goals for the Image of Christ exhibition was to portray Jesus as a real person, because he was a real person. He was completely man. And so often in Scripture, we hear it described that he would go off by himself and have a solitary moment. And that is the name of this painting, Solitary Moment. And I wanted to almost get into Jesus' head, or almost be able to see what he was doing in those solitary moments. And so I imagined him communicating with God, like him being one with the Father. And so we know in the Bible it says that God is light. So I imagined this cascading light coming from heaven and just sitting on the figure of Christ in this very dark, solitary place. And in a way, it looks like a waterfall. It looks like nature, and God has put his characteristics and the beauty in nature. So that's very important visually to describe that, because we even know that the world was created through Christ. So there's this connection between him being in creation, which he made, him communicating with God, and we have this isolated moment of Jesus. And the figure itself isn't defined. It is almost like a placeholder, because I want people to feel that they too can discover God. They too can find that moment with him. They can identify with the figure of Christ. And the next painting I wanted to jump to is actually the second solitary moment too. And what I've done in this exhibition, I've made this connection between historic images or imagined historic images and contemporary images. And so this is Solitary Moment 2. And it's very similar to the first painting you've just seen, where we see a lone figure in very similar darkness, looking out a window. So a window is kind of like a screen, and screens are a big part of this exhibition with some of the paintings. It's a theme because they play a big role in our lives today. And so we have a contemporary figure standing in front of a giant window, and the light again is very similar. It's cascading out of that window onto the figure. And in secular society, we often feel that we aren't confronted or we don't encounter the image of Christ. But Jesus is so close. He's so close, he's so near, and even in subtle ways. And that's why the window bars is the shape of the cross, which is a very significant symbol when it comes to Easter. And it being Easter, it wouldn't be Easter without acknowledging that Jesus died on the cross. And so we see this painting, which is quite a striking painting, if I had to say so myself. We have the figure of Christ, and he's almost jumping out at the viewer. And I've created this contrast between a very, very white, sculptural Jesus and this very dark background. And you'll see with a lot of the paintings, especially the ones where, and that includes this one, where I've painted a traditional history image. I've darkened the background to solely focus on the figure of Christ. And over here, there's just a hint of a Latin inscription, which basically said, translated, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And so in this painting, you can see I use the monochromatic painting, really creates that sculptural form. And this painting is painted after a wooden sculpture of Jesus. Okay, so jumping from, again, that tension between the historical and the contemporary, we have this painting. And for me, I think this is the most contemporary image in the entire show, and it's called Pieta Tattoo. So Pieta means the pity. And any art history fans will see that his tattoo on his back is Michelangelo's famous marble sculpture, La Pieta, which portrays Mary, the mother of Jesus, cradling the dead Christ in her arms as if he was a child. Now, she's portrayed as huge to be able to pull off this depiction. And this is a picture of someone with a tattoo of that on his back. And it's almost like a social media image. You know, people take photos of their tattoos. And for me, I was just trying to think, how do people engage with the image of Christ in secular society, in contemporary society? And many people are huge fans of religious iconography. And so there's this idea that Jesus himself is imprinted on people's bodies. So there's this nearness, there's such a closeness, such an intimate thing to have the image of Christ on your body. And then we see this painting of it. So as a viewer, as someone coming into the exhibition, we can contemplate that even though we feel like we don't encounter Christ or we don't see him, he is so close. And that is the idea I really want to portray with this painting. Now, this painting over here is also called the image of Christ, and it's from an AI-derived image. And there is a lot of talk and speculation and conspiracy theories as to how Jesus have looked. And as a culture, humanity in itself has always tried to make him perhaps in their own image or try to figure out what he looked like. And so this image is derived from the Shroud of Turin, which is believed to be the cloth that Jesus' body was wrapped in after he died. And I just thought it's important to introduce images that perhaps are connected to pop culture, because we live in it, and or contemporary culture. And so I found an image that someone had made, an AI image of it, and I painted it in this style. And the things that I added were marks on his head for his crowns of thorns, and I made it a lot more ethereal and mysterious for the viewer to see. And it's quite confrontational, because it is of a dead body, but it seems so alive, which is the wonderful thing about Jesus, that he was dead and now he's alive. And then what I'd like you to do when you visit this show is, once you've come over to the left side, is walk directly across to the right side. And we're going to start over here with another pop culture image. So paintings are a very traditional thing, but paintings can portray a lot of things. And so this is a painting of a screenshot from the movie The Passion of Christ, which is a very important movie to us. And I wanted the idea of closeness to Jesus. So this is a screenshot of a shot that was of a close-up of Jesus' face, but I went even closer. I wanted to capture that reflection in his eye. I wanted people to feel almost his last breath that he took as he said it was finished, this idea of the finality of his life. And I do feel like we are that close to him, if only we would believe. And just the realness of this image. And what's really amazing with this painting was it's been in my studio for over a year, and many people up close can't quite see what it is. But in this space, with this distance, you can tell what the painting is. It really comes together in this space. I not only wanted to engage with the image of Christ, but I wanted to somehow portray some of his teachings. And this painting deals with his teachings of anxiety, how the birds don't worry about tomorrow, how they don't store up for the future, and how God takes care of them today. And so this is about that teaching about worrying, and it's called The Birds of the Air. And it is a really lovely, I want to say, excuse to be able to paint birds. And again, nature is so illustrative of God's creative power. This painting is the second biggest painting in the show. It's called The Cursed Fig Tree. And it was one of the hardest paintings to paint. In fact, I painted it about 3 or 4 times, completing the painting, painting over, and then readdressing. Just because I wanted to capture that idea that this was a miracle of Christ. And he was talking about, alluding to the nation of Israel. And even just that imagery is so powerful of that dead, knotted, cursed fig tree. And it wasn't difficult because it was a larger painting to paint, but just to get the somberness and the realness of the tree. And so sometimes we have to be very honest about our process and say we didn't perform it right, but have the integrity to say, as an artist, I'm going to do this until I feel like it's ready to be seen. And so this is one of the most, in terms of images, paintings, this painting I'm one of the most proudest of in this exhibition, that I was able to portray it. And there were many images that I wanted to paint that didn't make it into the show because I felt that I couldn't quite perform them right. So I'm so grateful, so glad that this image came out the way it did. Okay, so we'll look at these 2 paintings together. This painting called Mary was actually the first painting that I did in the show, for this show. And it's from a screenshot of a movie. It wasn't a religious movie, but I just thought this character in this movie really does remind me of Mary, the mother of Jesus. But it also could be Mary, who was the first person to see Jesus after he resurrected. So with many of the figures in the painting, you'll see there's a suggestion of light, like we've seen with the solitary moment paintings, and also the idea of a halo. So a halo it points out someone's saintlyhood, or the fact that they are touched by Christ, or they are believers. So there's this idea of light emanating from them, and it really just is a visual direction towards saying that this person is of Christ. And so I've been playing around with halos in this exhibition, and with a lot of the paintings, it's just this very soft line that goes around the face. And this painting is completely unique. One of the early ideas that I abandoned, and in the painting, in the style of the paintings, was this idea of a frame within the frame, in this very jarring way, because you almost feel like you want to pull this image to show the entire thing. And I thought that visual trick is quite interesting, but I found a different way to put a frame within a frame. So this painting is a frame, and the painted image is within the frame. So I thought, let me rather use screens, and that's where these 2 next paintings come in. And if you see, within this painting is another frame, is a screen. And screens are something we deal with every day. And it's one way in which we see images. In fact, most of us see maybe 1,000 images a day on a screen. And if you think historically, that has never happened. In the past, artists were the only people who created images. If you wanted to see an image in the world, you had to go find an artist. Images are actually an incredibly rare thing, but they're no longer. And that's also one of the reasons why I chose to paint monochromatic images, because I feel like color has become such a distraction in this world that is so oversaturated with images. And so we see a figure in a darkly lit place, and she is watching on a screen the scene of Golgotha, of the crosses being erected. You see there's 2 up, and we just know perhaps maybe it's a movie, or it's a TV program, or it could even be a dream, that now she is watching the scene. So there's a sense of remove in terms of time, but then again, this idea of closeness, because the light emanating from this moment is around the figure. So there's this connection still we have with what happened to Jesus on that day. And you can't paint a screen, you can't talk about screens without talking about phones. So again, I thought, how are people confronted with the image of Christ? Just very basically, and that is through phones. And so we have someone, which is me, I use myself as a model, looking at a phone screen, and you see he's looking at this lit up image of Christ being crucified on the cross. And so I wanted to make that connection between contemporary society and what happened to Jesus a little bit more than 2,000 years ago. And then again, we have this, this tension between historic images and contemporary images. And I've done my own versions of some of my favorite paintings of the Easter-themed paintings. So this is a painting by Philippe de Champagne, who's one of the best, if you want to look up, one of the best religious painters ever. He was a French guy, and I've put my own spin in it. I've made this image very dark, and because I just feel like Jesus died, and this idea of his death was a complete tragedy because he was murdered. And so I wanted to make it this very, very dark scene, and in contrast with what we know what happened, because we know on the 3rd day he rose again, and there was this light and this vigor and this power. And so this painting really, for me, highlights that difference in Jesus' transition and in his overcoming of death to life. Okay, now we're going to move on to the pillars. So on each pillar, I have a different painting or set of paintings. And again, this is a historic image. One of my favorite painters is a Spanish painter, Diego Velázquez. And this is my version of his painting, Christ Crucified. And again, above we have the sign that reads, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And we see an almost naked Christ, right? And it's a very bare bones painting. In fact, he was one of the first artists to actually eliminate the entire Golgotha scene. All the other characters that we know were there, he just portrays solely the image of Christ in this painting. And I just thought my version is very different from his, because his is full color, and this is within the color scheme of this painting. And just because I'm just such a big fan of this artist, I felt I've always wanted to do a copy of this painting. And just in terms of art, technical art terms, we have this term called chiaroscuro, which means light and dark. And that is where you use a technique where you create vast differences between light and dark. And this entire exhibition highlights that idea of chiaroscuro. So here we have a contemporary image, not a historical image, an image that I took of my oldest daughter, Valerie, with my phone while she was sleeping. And I wanted to bring it close to my personal life because Jesus is close to me. And it made me think of Jesus' where he resurrected Jairus' daughter. And his words were, she's not dead, but she's just asleep. And so that's the title of this painting. She is just sleeping. And you'll also see with this painting, I don't know if you can see, there's some texture on it. I've created with a lot of the paintings, they are very, very layered. I've had to do multiple versions of this, trying to get the right image out. And so texture is important when you look at a work, because so often, like with screens, they're completely smooth. But I want you to realize that these paintings are actual objects in the world. They're not only windows in the world, that they are real objects. And so for me, the creation of a little bit of texture on a painting is very important. And you'll see that with all the paintings, there's aspects of smoothness and roughness. And so that's another part of the visceral interest, visual interest and enjoyment of a painting, is that they are textured. And they are actually a collection of autobiographical marks. That means man-made marks, kind of like your handwriting. So you can see where I've moved fast, where I've moved slow, where I have been super intentional on the face with the details, and where I've allowed myself to be a bit less intentional and allowed motion and movement to come in. So don't see these as just images. See them, this is me taking colored mud, which is what paint, and smearing it on a canvas. So this is an actual document of my movements and thoughts on a canvas. So we often see them as images, but these are objects in the world. The next pillar. We've all heard that we are the hands and feet of Christ. So I thought it was very important that I included the hands of Christ, because his hands were pierced. And as an evidence of who he was, he showed his disciples his pierced hands. And so I have painted this hand. Okay, this is actually straight from a sculpture that is on the NCCB campus. If you go out the foyer and you turn right, you'll see the seventh hand of God sculpture, and this being the highest hand, the carpenter's hand. That is what it's called. And it's actually molded and created from a real carpenter's hand. And this is another version of this painting, a different composition. And I used my hand as an example of this. And you'll see both hands are pierced and there's blood running down it. Now it's very macabre, quite a hard image to look at, but it's so ingrained, associated with what happened to Jesus, that his hands were pierced. And it's also quite significant that his hands were what he healed people with. And I still feel like Jesus can touch us today, because he's just as real and present as he was back then. And this painting is called The Man of Sorrows, after Anthony van Dyck, who is one of my favorite painters. He's a Flemish painter. He was actually an art teacher, a painting teacher. And so many of his works were instructive to his students. And so he would leave certain aspects of his work unfinished in order for his students to see how he made the work. And so a big part of me learning how to paint was through Anthony van Dyck. And he would start all his paintings with a grisaille underpainting. So grisaille basically just means gray. We'd paint the entire painting with grays. And that's essentially this whole exhibition. They all are grisailles. And then afterwards you'd add the color. And it's not that I haven't added the color, I've intentionally chosen not to, because I love that look of the grisaille. And the way I've approached this rendition of his well-known painting is, with his painting, he's surrounded by faces and figures who are mocking him. And I just thought the title Man of Sorrows implies a solitude, implies a silence, because he was silent among those accusers. And I wanted to depict that. So I blotted out all the figures around him and made him alone. And also, if you notice, again, hands are very significant. His hands are bound. And then once you've spent some time with each of these paintings, and again, as important as my intentions and musings and information about the paintings, it's so important that you filter things through how you see it. So you might see something that I didn't intend for these paintings, and it might speak to you very deeply. And that experience, your interpretation, what you see and what you feel, is of vital importance in this work as well. So don't only take what I'm saying, just see me as a guide. Now we come to the final and the main wall of the exhibition, and on the left we have this painting called The Saint, and it's an unknown female figure I wanted to paint. You can see I've darkened her face, so she could be anyone and she could be everyone. And this idea that you don't have to be one of the disciples or one of these historical figures to be considered part of the family of Christ, to be considered a saint. And again, I wanted to play around with the secular or the contemporary view of a Christian. And so it has almost this cartoony halo around, but this halo is real, and it's emanating light, and it's falling softly on this figure. So my hope for this painting was that people could look at it and identify with this person in there as well, and also be a part of the image of Christ. So the goal of a Christian is to become like Christ. So when you look at this painting, see yourself. And then we come to this image, and this painting is called The Image of Christ. And I thought, well, I can't have an exhibition without giving my take of an image of Christ. I wanted a portrait that was quite confrontational, that would look at a viewer and people could realize he was real. We don't know what he looked like. There's much debate and contention, and some of the images in this show pick up on that, but I'm not trying to definitively say this is who Jesus was and this is how he looked like. But it's important to realize that he was a real person, that he could stand in front of you in the same way that this image can, and he looks at you, and there's this beckoning, and there's this love, and there's this intensity to who this person was and who this person is, that his body, his bones, his flesh was once here, and is as real as any one of us is. And so that is what this painting is about. You can see there's a suggestion of a halo behind him, and I love this painting. And then finally, the largest painting in the show is called The Last Supper, and this is my version of The Last Supper. And we know that event happened just before Jesus was arrested, and in this event he announces that one of his disciples was going to betray him. And in traditional depictions of The Last Supper, each one of the figures are enacting their character. Okay, they're standing, they're debating, they're talking, but this painting is very different, and it's very indicative of the show. We have a giant screen behind them, emanating this light. There are two other screens flanking them. So there's this idea that it is this contemporary space, a movie theater, a church stage, and all of the figures aren't talking to each other. In fact, they are looking at the viewer. They are looking at you. And in a way, they're asking the question, what are you thinking about of this moment? Like, what are you thinking about communion? What are you thinking about? How do you deal with this idea of Jesus? And so they're asking that question. And so often paintings are a mirror to what's inside of you. So I think when people look at this painting, I want them to feel it is asking a question of them, that it is placing them on that stage with those characters. And each one of those people, which are actually people from this church, each one of those people are beckoning. Maybe perhaps, will you join us? And so it's just an interesting, different take on the Last Supper. Hi, my name is Nathan Vuuren, and I'm standing here in the NCCB foyer where we are hosting the Image of Christ exhibition. And thank you so much for attending the opening this Easter weekend. And I just want to invite and remind everyone that this exhibition is still open for viewing during the week, during week hours. And you're also welcome to come on a Sunday during our services at 8:30 and 10:30 to see the exhibition.